When did Film Threat cross over into the mainstream?
Well, I would say that Film Threat crossed over in the mainstream probably in the early 90s. I remember I got a check from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for a subscription to Film Threat, a check which I never cashed. And it had, it had the logo of the Oscar on there. And I was just like, I'm never going to cash this check. I'm going to keep it. And I kind of felt that like people were paying attention. It wasn't just that we were covering, underground filmmakers. We were also kind of giving a finger to Hollywood by the choices of the types of filmmakers in the movies that we chose to cover, but then we would kind of mock the pomposity of Hollywood. Some of the stories that come to mind, we wrote an article about comparing Hollywood's hierarchy to the caste system in India, with the untouchables at the bottom, which would be your PAs and whatnot, and just explain how this hierarchy works, the power structure, right? So these are things that people actually do talk about now, but we were talking about early on. Additionally, I would be getting, other people, for example, Steven Soderbergh wrote me a letter in which he basically lambasted Film Threat, saying, you're awful, you suck, you're terrible, I can't believe it, encloses a check for all back issues and a subscription. So he was fucking with me. But I began to notice in the early 90s that people were paying attention, and there were stories that got attention in the magazine. Stories that, now it's a thing that I guess would trend on Twitter. But when we did those stories, it was the first time people were really hearing about them, kind of challenging the Hollywood status quo and pointing out a lot of the bullshit. I don't think anyone was doing that at that time. And now I think there's more of an awareness of the pitfalls of being involved in this industry.
Did you sell the magazine to Larry Flynt? What happened?
Yeah, when I sold the magazine to Larry Flynt in 1991, I sold it with the caveat that I'm still involved, right? So it was basically, I didn't see it as selling it to him so much as I'm basically giving myself a job, because it came with the responsibility of managing a budget. So, and running the magazine, I was part of the package, right? So basically, Larry was hiring me to do Film Threat magazine via his company. And when I did it, it's really interesting. We would sneak things into the magazine that would be not noticed. This was difficult, but if you looked at the side of some of the articles, there were things that we spelled specifically on the side that if you circled it like a crossword, we were sneaking messages into the magazine. So it was still I was still able to maintain my vision, right? But an interesting part was when I sold it to him, the whole idea was I wasn't giving him the magazine. I was licensing the name so that he could do a mainstream version of it. And then I would retain the rights to a thing called Film Threat Video Guide. I also received 2 pages of advertising gratis in the magazine. And I would run advertising for movies that we were distributing in Film Threat Video Guide. So I tried to do a very creative deal. I realized early on in my negotiations with Larry Flynt that he wasn't going to pay me any money for the magazine. So how do I get value? Well, one, I've given myself a job, right? I've got a budget and I could actually pay myself. And at the time, I believe I was paying myself around $1,500 per issue. And they published 6 issues a year. So, right. We live in an age where gig economy and people doing side hustles is kind of common. It wasn't common, but for me, I did that and I did other things on the side to make money. So I had this budget of about $10,000 for editorial per issue that included photographer and other editors and whatnot that I paid, including what I got paid. So I had that budget. And then I had the two pages of free advertising. And with the 2 pages of free advertising, I just ran ads for movies we were selling. So that was another way for me to make money. So what I tried to do is be creative with that deal. And this is something that I learned a lot. I think some of the best deals that I've ever made are ones I didn't take. Because it's unbelievable. And look, I'm not a lawyer, but I have read all the contracts that I've done for television and whatnot. And what I really care about is what I'm getting paid, what my time commitment is, what are my obligations, meaning are there any holds on things, like what are my restrictions? Am I unable to work for another network, right? What I try to do is knowing that whatever they're going to pay me is never going to be enough. I try to negotiate things that don't cost money, actual out-of-pocket money for the entity that I'm negotiating with, in order to get value for something that's good for me. For example, holding the rights to the name, like I still own the name. I was licensing Larry Flynt, the trademark, to the name to do a magazine. If he ceased doing the magazine, I had what they call right of first refusal, which means I could get the rights back from him. So he would have to offer to sell it to me first. As it is, I ended up getting the rights back because the offers they were getting were not up to what they were looking for. So I look for those things that don't cost money out of pocket, that a corporation can just go, that doesn't cost us any money. And because they're always thinking about the bottom line, in a way, you can kind of trick a larger entity into giving you something that may have large value. For me, it was getting free advertising in Film Threat, because I know the size of the checks that we sent filmmakers. And because of that, because I controlled the editorial, so I could write about movies that we were selling and then run advertising for the movies that we were selling, we sold a lot of VHS underground tapes through Film Threat Video. Because I remember seeing, the size of the checks that we were sending to like York Boutgarret were substantial, in the tens of thousands of dollars. So that was valuable. I think the most famous example, and unfortunately there may never be a deal like this in the history of movies, was George Lucas when he, did Star Wars. He was willing to, take a lower fee to hold on to the sequel rights and the merchandising rights. That will never happen to a creative person ever again. Look how valuable that became. And so I think you really have to be, in any of the deal making, be creative. Even if it's something as simple as you're making the movie and you have the rights to the t-shirt that a character wears in a pivotal scene in the movie. Do you know what I'm saying? I know that sounds crazy, but if there's a way that you can find that can be something you can monetize from the film that doesn't cost anything for the entity that's funding it to give you. Does that make sense? Am I being clear? Yeah. So I did that, and then I learned from that experience with other deals that I made going forward, especially with doing work in television and whatnot. And also when I did a film, My Big Fat Independent Movie. Those same things kind of came into play, where I look for a creative way to do a deal. And I think we spoke earlier in our conversation about being an artist and being creative. I think it's important to be creative from a business standpoint, because that will serve you well. When I sold My Big Fat Independent Movie to Anchor Bay Entertainment, they gave us, so they were gonna, I made this movie called My Big Fat Independent Movie, which is a spoof comedy, right? I co-wrote it with two other comedy writers. The director is a guy named Philip Zlotarinsky, and the whole point was to pepper it with some cameos. People like Bob Odenkirk, Paget Brewster are in it, Clint Howard, and we were just going to make a cheesy comedy. But while we didn't get into Sundance, we did play South by Southwest, and then we played a bunch of medium-level festivals. South by wasn't the behemoth it is today. But we played some medium-sized festivals and finally got an offer from Anchor Bay Entertainment. They were going to release it on video and DVD. And I was really gratified when we started negotiating. I showed them the marketing materials that we had. And to me, marketing materials are a way to boost the value of your film. To me, and I explain this in my book, The Ultimate Film Festival Survival Guide, I always say, you got to look at your movie like a stock. What can you do to increase the value of that movie and or stock? Well, cast. Cast will help increase the value, right? Good marketing materials, I think, are important because you're showing to a distributor how you might sell the movie. It's generally the distributor's job how to market the film, but I don't know that they can be counted upon today. It's important to at least present, here's one way to sell the film. And I do love seeing the evolution of marketing materials from a film, like from the postcard a young filmmaker will hand you at a film festival to like what it ends up being, generally are vastly different, but at least you have to have some example of how the movie might be marketed. And that at least can spur the imagination of a distributor as to like, oh, I see how we can sell this now. That's not exactly the right poster, but we can do a better one. So I had this whole binder filled with, I created in our production schedule for my Big Fat Independent movie, I scheduled time to do interviews with the cast because they would be in character makeup and wardrobe. You can't always count on that. So we did interviews for what would be behind the scenes on the DVD. We scheduled a photo shoot of all the actors. That was like a half day. We're just doing the photo shoot. This is for the box cover. And we did multiple variations of that. If you look up my Big Fat Independent Movie poster, we did parodies of iconic indie film posters like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, Clerks by Kevin Smith, Amelie, among others. Swingers was another one, Jon Favreau's Swingers. So we set up photo shoots with all the actors to do parodies of those posters and then did a series of those. We also launched a website. Not every movie had a website back in 2005, which interestingly enough, I got in a whole conversation with the MPAA when we launched our website that you could not have post-Columbine a character pointing a gun on a poster. So we had to change it. Instead of pointing a gun, we had to have someone could be holding a gun, but it had to be in a different way. So it's very interesting. Actually, the MPA was very nice about it. You know, they were just requesting certain changes to our website so as not to promote stuff that was, highlighting gun use in a film, right?
Almost like Charlie's Angels. You know how
Right.
the silhouette was of them pointing it up in the air the other way. Okay, I see.
Yeah, exactly. So we had to make alterations, which was like not a terrible compromise, knowing that going in. But the key art image we used when we were on the festival circuit was a guy pointing a gun. But in any case, so we had developed all these marketing materials in the course of the festival run, so that when I presented all these marketing materials to Anchor Bay, they were so impressed by the materials. They said they'd never had it so organized. We actually had a website that had like corresponding with all the slides of like, here's all the key art. And it was like, I like, slide number 51234. Okay, we're going to use that one. But in this one, we can sort of clip out this person from 3819. You know what I mean? Like it made communication really great, and they loved it, and it gave us an edge. And also, they were so confident about the film that they gave us an additional $100,000 to release the movie theatrically. And the key cities that we released my Big Fat Independent Movie theatrically were all because that's where the Best Buy buyers lived. So the buyers who bought for Best Buy, which were cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Dallas, Detroit, among others, the movie played. And that's because that's where Best Buy, the people who bought product for Best Buy, they lived in those cities. So we did a small theatrical release. It was like, 2 weekends in and out, platform release, put the film there. We had end caps at Best Buy. We had 2 different versions, a double disc, version with all the extras. And I actually produced that DVD. I kind of tried to make it like a parody of a special edition DVD with Easter eggs on every page. One of the Easter eggs was behind the scenes, which was like a security cam shot of an editor. And you see it's like day 1, he's sitting there, it's kind of boring, crossfade. Day 2, boring. Day 3, boring. And then he kind of smells his armpit. And then it crossfades again and he's changed his shirt. So I know it's stupid. It's a very juvenile sense of humor. But But I was having fun with all of the extras that were on the DVD, which would be in line with a movie that had jokes involving subtitles, So, but I did learn that, that really helps when you have these assets. What are these assets? Other assets that can help raise the value of a film. Obviously, reviews can help. I'm not sure if they're as valuable today, but reviews help. Endorsements, even if it's from a filmmaker who says something nice, or a filmmaker of some renowned saying something nice. I mean, this leads to things like David Lynch Presents or whatnot. So think of your indie film like a stock, and outside of the movie, either yourself or someone from your team, look at the ways you can increase the value of it and be creative with the deal. Because whatever they're offering you, I don't care what it is, it's never enough money. So if they're not offering you money, that to me is leverage. It's leverage. And the thing that shocks me is how so few filmmakers use that leverage. If you're not giving me money, I have all the power, right? And so what am I going to ask for? Well, I'm going to ask for, I own this and this and this and this and whatnot. I can change the window, exclusivity window. I can insist that certain marketing money be spent to promote the film, which I think is even more important. And I would even say, like, just having spent time on the festival circuit, I mean, you can spend, tens of thousands of dollars on a college education in film, or you could also read books, spend tens of thousands of dollars on a movie you make, take it on the festival circuit, and that's almost like getting a master's in film, that experience. So, I don't know that and this is actually the beauty of pursuing a career as a filmmaker and an artist, is there's not one right pathway, right? There are multiple pathways towards success, but you have to really be critical. And if something's not working, go in another direction. I feel that that's important, is to really take a look at yourself and go, okay, not working, whether it's my consistency, output of pages, or, finishing on a deadline. Really take a look and create processes that work for you. I know that this is going to sound very strange, but I keep a list, and I do it every year. I have this very weird ritual. Every New Year's Day, in addition to going to watch the Rose Parade on Colorado Avenue, I do this sort of inventory of like what I accomplished in the previous year. And I type out a list of the things I want to accomplish in the coming year. I take this list and I print it out on a piece of paper, very tiny, in really inscrutably small type, and I put it in my wallet because I know I'm going to look at it about once a day, right? Open my wallet about once a day for something, and I'll see it. And I keep that list close at hand. It's something actually I learned, Olympic athletes have done that. And I know that there's a lot of work efficiency software. Most of that is actually centered around communicating with other people, whether it's Google Sheets, which we use. We pretty much use the Google suite of products at Film Threat. Sheets, Docs, Google Slides, etc., for like marketing decks. But I always just make a list. Like, the dumb thing is there's all this software that tells you what to do. I just make a list and I do what's on the list. So here's the list of what I have to do, my sort of top list. Then I have like, this is what I need to get done today. This is what needs to get done this week. And what was so satisfying, I take out my pen and I cross off the list. That's it. It's worked for me. So I don't know. I feel like I'm definitely a list junkie.
I'm hoping to go back to
Sure.
just Larry Flynt and Flynt Productions.
Sure.
Were you working in his office or the office that his building?
Yes. So Larry Flynt's offices were set up very strange. You'd walk in and everyone that walked in walked by what we called the Wall of Shame, which was every magazine that Larry Flynt published, which included things like Hustler, Chic, all sorts of adult magazines. And then there were magazines like Rip magazine, a heavy metal magazine, Hot Boat, PC Laptop, magazines that were just sort of traditional, simple magazine. There was a magazine called BBW, Big Beautiful Women. It's a fashion magazine for large-sized women. So he published a lot of different magazines. They were kind of sectioned off. I mean, initially we were all together. There was like this corner was all the adult magazines. They never referred to them as adult magazines. They called them men's sophisticates.
Interesting. Okay.
Make of that what you will.
Okay.
So, but in any case, so they had that corner, and then there was the sort of other down the hall that were all the other types of magazines. You know, your computer magazines, your video game magazines, the music magazine Rip. Eventually, Larry Flynt bought a building, which I believe is still at the corner of La Cienega and Wilshire.
Yeah.
With the big John Wayne statue right in front.
I think it says Flint Publications at the top in gold or something. Last time I was there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, when I first started working for Larry Flynt, everything was in one building. Then they broke it up. All the men's sophisticates were in one building, and then they took all the non-adult publications, they put them in another building. So we had to actually move across the street. And that building was very interesting because there was a very prominent attorney that was there who represented people like, Magic Johnson, Kurt Cobain, and Courtney Love. I saw in that building going up in the elevator. Rodney King, the attorneys who represented Rodney King were also in that building. That famous speech where he said, "Can we all just get along?" That was right outside where I worked.
Oh, wow.
At Film Threat. We were on the 6th floor of that building. And so we were separated for a while between the adult magazines and the the more traditional magazines. It was just, that was an interesting experience. And then eventually Larry Flynt, there were rumors that he might have done this because he knew his life was being developed into a movie. I knew at the time the screenwriters Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski. I knew them because we did a cover story on Ed Wood, directed by Tim Burton, and we wanted to get an interview with Johnny Depp, and the publicist was being a pain in the ass. There are publicists that I get along with, but I think that publicists make a lot, that they make a lot of power moves that I find infuriating at times. And many times I'll meet the filmmaker, they're like, "Why didn't we talk to you?" It's just like, I don't know, I went through the publicist, that was the right way to do it. But having spoken to Scott and Larry, they interviewed Johnny Depp for Film Threat, for our cover story, which
nice.
I'm grateful to them for that. We then became friends, and they told me about their script about Larry Flynt. So I was kind of this go-between between like Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski are developing this script. And at the time, I think Bill Murray was going to play Larry Flynt.
Oh, wow.
This is a very early draft of it. And then I had, to help them with the production, I had stolen out of the archives one copy of every issue of Hustler magazine ever published from the beginning. And I gave it to them for the production, and they never returned it.
Oh.
Scott and Larry, dudes, return my collection.
How many issues was that?
Oh, God, I don't know. Over 100. I mean, it was crazy. So
maybe they're still doing research.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like when the magazine was founded in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
This was like the early 90s, so 12 issues a year. It was a lot. I mean, it was bins, of these magazines. So in any case, I gave it to them for the production. And kind of end up being something of a liaison between like talking to them and then talking to Jim Coles and Larry Flynt, like, hey, you need to trust these guys. They did this movie with Tim Burton. Their at least their specialty, which was they were sort of developing, was biopics, right? I mean, they had written a biopic of Sid Marty Krofft that I eventually wrote about in a book called The 50 Greatest Movies Never Made. If you know anything about Sid and Marty Krofft, you can go down a rabbit hole of their lives. I mean, they created the Banana Splits, which they sold to Hanna-Barbera, and then they created their own production company. Sid and Marty Krofft created, these are live action shows with big either puppets and or like giant suits, and they created shows like Sigmund and the Sea Monster, Land of the Lost. I mean, these are franchises that exist to today. I mean, they kind of owned Saturday morning in the 70s. So Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski had written a screenplay about it was a biopic of Sid and Marty Krofft. They came from a family of Polish puppeteers. Fascinating. And additionally, they even opened a theme park in Atlanta based on Sid and Marty Krofft productions. One of the famous rides of it was you were in a pinball machine. You were the pinball. You can look all this up. You can go down a rabbit hole of the internet or YouTube or whatever to discover this stuff. But I ended up becoming this liaison between the two and then kind of connected them, basically just saying, look, we just did this story on these guys. They're legit screenwriters who did something really special with Ed Wood. I think it might be Tim Burton's best movie. It's certainly the most traditional of his films. In any case, so I ended up just sort of getting them to talk so that something could actually get made. And that's when Milos Forman became involved and Courtney Love, who played Althea Flint, and then eventually Woody Harrelson. So I was merely I end up being, and this is, I'm kind of like, and no one's going to know this, Zelig, the character created by Woody Allen, which was this guy that popped up. I'm kind of a Zelig of indie film. I show up in spots where I have a small role in something happening. So if you see me pop up in things and someone telling a story about me, it's generally half true.
What did Larry Flynt teach you about business? Maybe just through observation.
Wow. What did Larry Flynt teach me about business? Well, one, we used to joke that LFP stood for low fucking pay. Because when we would look at Folio magazine and they would do like a salary survey, what they did was they would release the annual, this was the most prized issue of Folio magazine, was the salary survey issue. And in that issue, you would see, if you're an associate editor at a magazine with this much circulation, you should be paid this. Well, we all soon realized that all of our pay was at the bottom of the scale, right? And a lot of my coworkers on other magazines complained a lot about it. Oddly enough, I didn't complain because I felt so grateful to have the opportunity. Remember, I'm a college dropout. I did not finish college, and here I am. Not only did I write, comedy and jokes and humor for Hustler magazine, I went on to do, Film Threat magazine, where I'm like this 25-year-old kid in charge of a magazine that's nationally distributed. I mean, I was way too young to have all the responsibility that I had. But I did learn a lot from the standpoint of just like trying to budget. So when, some of the editors were complaining about the budget, I'm like, this is the most money I've ever had, and I can be creative with this budget. So so he taught me how to budget. One of the things I began to do, which the other editors hated me for, is I would submit a budget every month because I knew I had $10,000 to spend on an issue. There were certain fixed costs. Myself, another editor, my colleague David E. Williams, other assistant editors that we had, like they got a monthly fee, a freelance fee per issue. So I knew that was fixed. So that took up like half the budget. Then the rest of the budget went toward writers and photography. So I would break it down, but in order to keep track, because I was so afraid of going over budget, I would always like do a budget report. So I wouldn't just send invoices. I'd say, here's a budget report, and it added up to $9,850 or whatever it was. And he loved that so much, he made all the editors do that. And they hated me for that because then they had to actually keep a budget. But to me, it was just like me being financially responsible because I needed to know, like, I can't go over budget. And I kept a budget because when I was doing Film Threat independently, I didn't want to, I only had X amount to spend. So taught me about that. Additionally, he brought me in his office once because the weird thing was, he began to refer to me as like this wunderkind, right? Because I could take like a magazine a lot of the magazines to me, there were just like really obvious graphic things that some of the magazines weren't doing, or they had too many cover lines. And I used to do this weird thing where at that time we were on like the 3rd floor, and I would have like an intern working for Film Threat go, here's a mock cover of the magazine. Can you take the cover and put it on the ground of the 3rd floor? And so all the editors all the writers, we would gather around the window. We would look at the magazine and we could see what can we read? Or what stood out. So I learned things like on magazine covers, people make eye contact. They make eye contact with people's faces on the magazine cover. Now you can do that, and that, that will grab your eye because we make eye contact with people who make eye contact with faces on magazine covers. But I thought, well, that's sort of uninspired. That's why all magazine covers tended to look the same. So we always try to do something creative. One issue of Film Threat, we did sort of this fake cover of Martin Scorsese taking an Oscar and breaking it in half. And the cover line was, will Martin Scorsese lose it? Meaning lose an Oscar. That was the thing that I learned about writing cover lines, was they all had to be kind of second read, have some sort of double entendre or something like you read it one way, then you can see it as a different way. And but because of that, he brought me in his office and he told me this bizarre story about factory workers that they would change the temperature of the light in the room so it'd be lighter or darker, and people who worked in factories liked that because it showed that management paid attention to them. I think his whole point was that I'm paying attention to you now, you should pay attention to people who work under you, right? I mean, we would have like these idea jam sessions where we get together and say, what are we gonna do? What do people want out of Film Threat, right? And that's where stories like the Hollywood caste system story came about, among others, where we were just like, we need to do a story that's a conceptual piece. There was always like, we need something that's a concept piece. One was, I went and I was in a studio audience of a bunch of different TV shows, and then we collected data and did a survey of like, if you want to see these TV shows, here's how to see them, and here's what your experience is going to be like. Among others. I look back now, some of them are pretty dumb, but would probably do well today in the age of clickbait that we live. But also the thing that I admired about Larry that he just taught me by example was just like to be fearless, and we live in a time where it is dangerous to be fearless. It truly is. So, we need that kind of freedom to be able to have conversations and be able to digest things that might be comfortable, and maybe to rely a little less on our feelings. I personally believe that feelings are overrated. And by that, I mean, I would have been a terrible father if I cared about my feelings. Because I don't really feel like getting up at 3 a.m. and changing a baby's diaper, but I did it because that's my obligation and my duty. And I did a lot of things in order to achieve certain goals that I didn't want to do or feel like doing. Because we can have all this discussion sort of mining through trying to find out a secret or a shortcut of how to do something. And here's what I've learned from everything, all my experiences. It comes down to one thing, and that's hard work. And hard work involves sometimes setting aside how you feel about something in order to achieve something. I don't feel like getting up at 5 a.m. and writing 1,000 words or staring at a blank page. I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like going to the gym. I don't feel like, and when I talk to friends that they get so much into talking about their feelings, I say to them, and someone actually wrote a book about this, fuck your feelings, right? This is a book, is it Mark
Manson?
Mark Manson.
Is that the subtle?
The Subtle Art of Not Giving a
Right,
Fuck.
right. Okay.
Another great book. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that there are, not that you can't indulge in your feelings at an appropriate moment, but when it comes to, if you really want to achieve something, you have to set aside your feelings. If your goal and you're on set and we're losing light, it's like it doesn't, sometimes it's like it can get testy on a film set. It just can, especially on an indie film set when you have so few days to turn around a movie and I think it's important to obviously to be respectful to everyone on set, but when things are pushed to shove, we gotta go. And a lot of time, yes, it is like herding kittens, and people gotta like set your feelings aside. Let's get this thing, and creating that environment where that can happen. But when I look at like whenever I've actually accomplished something worthwhile, it's always because I set aside my feeling of not wanting to do that thing. Although I would say in the writing process, sometimes procrastination is part of the process. If you look at my bookshelves and you see how everything is alphabetized and everything is neat, it's because I'm stalling, because I'm thinking through what I'm going to write. And so I'm doing some mundane task to build up to when I'm going to sit down and do the thing. But really, I'll just say that to me, that there's no secret. There's only hard work.
And you saw that in him as well?
I saw that in him, yeah. I mean, this is a guy that didn't give a... Larry Flynt did not give a fuck. He didn't care what you thought of him. He didn't care, like, he just didn't... He didn't care. I think maybe if he cared about one thing, it's like why mainstream media maybe didn't give him the respect that he was owed. Because they enjoyed the freedom to speak their minds in mainstream media because of what he had sacrificed.
Sure.
And so when I look at that, I think that whatever my mundane complaints are kind of pointless, you know, and especially with everyone going through such a difficult time living in, you know, the after times, the pandemic times, all this stuff that we've been going through. Anything bad, quote, bad that has happened to me this year, you know, a flat tire, this thing, you know, someone being, you know, any small thing, if that's the worst thing that happens to me today, it is the greatest day ever because I'm alive and I have opportunity and I'm just grateful. So I think that attitude can power you through when things are difficult, when projects get difficult. So yeah, perspective, it helps.
Do you think you would have started Film Threat had you been 23 today in 2021?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know. Like, I mean, I know I would have just done something that was sort of contrary to things. I see sort of a sameness in a lot of things that become popular. I'm very bad at predicting what becomes the popular thing. In general, I don't like mainstream music. In general, you know, when a mainstream movie is good, I certainly will appreciate it, but I tend to go for whatever the sort of alternative of the thing is, whether it's music, comic books, you know, whatever it is, like that's the thing I'm most attracted to. So I'm terrible at predicting, and modern music to me is just, it's garbage. I don't really listen to much that's happening. But I've always tended to, when I look at my collection, it's pretty much all movie soundtracks, you know, because for the most part, there's no vocals and that can distract you when you're trying to write. But in any case, yeah, so I don't know that I could have created Film Threat today. I don't know. I mean, maybe it would have just been a YouTube channel and not a film review website. I'm not sure. And, you know, I don't know. You know, like we do have a website where you can read our reviews, but are people reading reviews now? They read tweets of reviews. Do they read real reviews now? I'm not sure. So yeah, I don't know if I would have created Film Threat now. I will say this, when I look at what Film Threat began as, and I look at where we are in our conversation about movies, I believe it was way ahead of its time in terms of the ideas that it espoused. And I feel like it's only now that it's come to fruition, meaning we, you know, the barriers to entry to becoming a filmmaker are so minimal now in terms of being the possibility of making films with an iPhone or whatnot. You can make a movie with a phone, you know, it's affordable, you know, it's the equipment is within your grasp to be able to make a high quality project. What I do fear is we're losing the artistry and the sort of common usage of the term content. People just say content. They turn that, I'm not going to use that word. There's certain just words I'm not going to use. I'm not saying the word content. It's not, these are movies, they're films. There's a difference between a movie and a film and cinema, right? And content is sort of I feel like content doesn't matter. Content is to fill, you know, a release schedule for a streaming service, So I avoid that term at any cost. So I feel like if there's some level of artistry that you can put in whatever that content is, that's something to strive for. But Film Thread, I don't know that I could have created it today. And I think that also I'm a very different person than who I was when I first started Film Thread. When I look back at certain issues and go, I would never say that now. Or like, I can 100%, with 100% certainty, I can tell you, there are things in the old Film Thread or things I wrote like jokes in Hustler that will get me canceled. I think it's just a matter of like, who is getting canceled this day? But I have such a vast, from podcast appearances to YouTube to having been on television for 15 years, it's a gold mine of cancelable material. But I think that's also why people kind of like me is I speak my mind and I'm not, I like to say being from Michigan and being from Detroit, I have a highly tuned bullshit detector, which I can just tell you that so many people I meet in Hollywood are full of shit. And that's why I say that move here and pursue opportunities here at your own risk. A lot of talkers, not a lot of doers. In fact, it was weird because one weird thing, when I first moved to LA and I would meet people and they'd give me their card. This is when people had cards. They'd have their address on it and I'd say, hey, I'll mail you some copies of the magazine or I'll send you a copy of this movie we just released on VHS. And I would do it. They were surprised because they're like, no one ever does what they say. And I was just like, but I told you I would do it. And that's this sort of Michigan, Detroit guy in me of I say I'm going to do stuff, I do it. It was just funny that people would just be surprised. Wait, you actually did the thing. And I would respond to every letter. As we're going through, we're working on a documentary about Film Threat, tentatively titled Film Threat Sucks. And we've been going through our physical archives. And oddly enough, I responded, if someone wrote us a letter, I wrote them back. And I have every letter. I have them in categories. I sort of have them in full. This is back when people would mail letters to Film Threat. So really, it's unbelievable. I look at that archive and the kind of conversations I was having with people, people who some of them ended up writing for Film Threat and working for Film Threat. And some of them told me to go fuck myself, or, they were pissed off about something that I did. That's cool, whatever.
Why? Why were they mad at a review?
A review or this. And I think a lot of times, though, they were trying to bait me to get in the magazine because we had a section, and this goes to being a contrarian. So there are two things that I noticed that every magazine in the world did. They would write a bullshit self-congratulatory editorial talking about all the writers and how great this issue of the magazine was about to read. It was utterly meaningless. And it was the editorial. And I was determined to always use that page to make a point about something that mattered, rather than basically doing a teaser trailer or a commercial for what you're about to read. The second thing was that they would always do was a letter section that would just say how great the magazine was. And I was like, we're never going to do that. We're going to do a letter section that will only talk about, people who criticize us. You guys suck. I mean, we would have the last word. And not only that, we would actually physically cut out the letters and reduce them in size and put them on the page. So you'd actually see, we'd have to edit them for space, but we would put the actual physical letter that was sent from people, and then we would reply to all of them. So we kind of encouraged people, we called it hate mail. We kind of encouraged people to come at us, whether it was our opinions or whatnot. A lot of people did photos. It was very much, the kind of same way that we participate with memes. Looking through the Film Threat archives, it's like, oh my God, this is early, building that kind of community with memes and, trying to make each other laugh and whatnot. So, yeah, it's weird revisiting that for this documentary, which you may get to see someday.
Hope so.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have a link to the trailer, but no,
yeah, sure.
This video.
There is a sizzle reel that's out on YouTube that helped get attention for the project, but it's been 10 years in the making to get this documentary, made. That's a whole other thing. I mean, I'm not directing it. I'm you know, the quote executive producer, but I'm shepherding it because it's my personal story. It's my personal collection from my archives. It's, you know, a lot of other people's story. There are other people that are a huge part of Film Threat's early success and whatnot. So they're a part of that story.